Hey there everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming out today. So I'm taking a little hike in a little woodland area here, and the clouds are coming and going, so the light's great, and then it's, but it is midday because that's when I have time to make these videos. So, a lot of new subscribers, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I've been a professional landscape photographer full-time since 2006, and I had my first gallery show of my black and white large format landscape work in 1997, but I was part-time back then. So I've been doing this for a while. Started out as a wedding photographer in New York back in 1985-ish. Did an apprenticeship program for that because I really wanted to learn photography and I really wanted to be a landscape photographer. And I figured, well, if I make a living doing weddings, people pay me for that, and then I'll have the gear. And yeah, well, you get the idea. I'm sure a lot of people started that way. But now we have YouTube, and YouTube allows us to watch videos and learn from other people's mistakes, which is what this video is about. 5 mistakes to avoid for better landscape photography. Here we go. Number 1, always be ready, okay? I had a friend back in Portland, really cool guy. He's about 20 years older than me. He was a glamour photographer in London during the 60s. So you could say he was the original Austin Powers in a way. But what an interesting guy. So Hal told the story where he was actually working for Magnum at the time, which I turned into Getty Images, I'm not sure. It was a big stock agency that supplied photographs to newspapers and all around the world and news agencies, etc. So he was actually one of their staff photographers. And one day he went to run some errands in London, and he was driving by Buckingham Palace, evidently. I've never been there, I'm not sure, but if you're from there and you know what I'm talking about, okay. So he was driving by Buckingham Palace, and evidently there's a long driveway that goes up to the palace where the Queen lives. And as he's driving by, he glances over, because you look in, and down this long driveway, halfway down the driveway, is a Rolls Royce, the Queen's Rolls Royce with the flags, with the hood up, and the chauffeur scratching his head looking at the engine, and the Queen and Prince Charles. Now remember, this was back in the 60s. So the Queen and a little Prince Charles, she's got him by the hand, and they're walking back to the palace. And he didn't have his camera with him because he didn't think he needed it that day, okay? So yeah, that would have made his life to a certain extent. He would have made a lot of money off of that photograph. So the moral of the story is always bring your gear and be ready for the shot. This shot that I took of the Rainbow Gorge up to Columbia River Gorge, we were driving back and forth between Portland and Union, Oregon, Union County, Oregon, La Grande, where I live now. We were moving, and we would do it in increments. We made a lot of trips back and forth up the gorge. It was about a 5-hour trip. I was moving. I wasn't doing photography, but I took my camera bag and I threw it in the truck just in case. As we're heading back to Portland, we're driving down the road in the Columbia River Gorge, and it had been thunderstorming, and it was getting about sunset. And I'm kind of looking around, and the sunset's kind of happening, and the light's kind of getting that orangey glow. And I look behind me, and there's this full rainbow in the Columbia River Gorge with the sunset lighting up the thunderstorm clouds. And just happened, and I said, I have to stop. And just there was the turnout for this like rest area right before you get into Portland, and it's right on the spit that, I mean, it was perfect. And so I grabbed my camera, didn't have time, it was a Nikon D700 with the 14-24 on it, grabbed the camera, ran out there, no tripod, handheld, and this is the shot I got. And I've sold a lot of these, of that shot. So always be ready. There was a day when I was moving. It wasn't a day when I was photographing. So rule number 1, always have your camera with you if you even think that there's an inkling of a photograph to be made. Because when it comes to landscape photography, you never know when the light's gonna hit you. So that's my first tip. Or to put that another way in terms of a mistake, don't leave your camera home. You can't take photographs if you don't have it with you. So the mistake is not having a camera. Okay, beginner mistake number 2. Don't go out and photograph stuff unless you know what your target is. Know what you're trying to make your photographs look like, okay? And the best way to do that is find landscape. I mean, obviously you've seen some landscape photographs that have inspired you to make you want to go out and take landscape photographs of your very own. So whoever that may be, whatever photographs that may be that have inspired you to want to take landscape photographs, study them, look at them, get them in your head. This way, when you're out photographing and when you get your photographs back, you have something to compare to. You can look at what you were trying to accomplish and see how far below or maybe you accomplished it. That's awesome. So you've got to have a target. You have to have something in mind that you're trying to achieve, right? You have to have a target that you're trying to hit, or a goal, let's say. Galen Rowell said you learn through emulation. You learn by trying to copy the work that that inspires you. But my point is when you go out and you try to recreate what some of the masters have done, it's a great learning experience. And the work that you do is not going to be the same. It's not going to be an exact copy, but you're going to start realizing what your style is and what your interpretation is of the scene. But it's a great place to start. The three photographers, if I had to name three photographers, and I've said this in other videos, that inspire me, it would be Ansel Adams, Galen Rowell, and Michael Kenna. And if you look at my work, it's kind of an amalgamation of all three, and I didn't do that on purpose, but it's kind of weird. My style is kind of a mishmash of how I interpret stuff thrown in on top of all that, but they definitely influenced me is what I'm trying to say. I highly recommend getting some books. 400 Photographs by Ansel Adams, $20, $30. Fantastic book, really important book if you're trying to nail your black and white in terms of contrast. That way, with that book, you can get in your head what black and white is supposed to look like, okay? And this way you can judge if you've gone too far or not far enough. Any book by Galen Rowell I would recommend if you're into color work. He's the guy that really nailed that color landscape photography back in the day, I'm just saying. So, and then of course Michael Kenna, if you're into more minimalist photography, books by Michael Kenna can be very expensive if you find them used on the secondhand market. Pick them up, but they're not cheap. A lot of his work you can view online as well. But there it is. So my second tip would be find photographers that inspire you, get books of their work, and then if you're a beginner and you need a place to start, go out and try to make work that emulates that work, and then go from there, right? And I'm not saying you're copying them, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing. What I'm saying is you're attempting to do what they did, and then you can realize how difficult whatever their process was. Interestingly, all the photographers that inspire me seem to have been last century. So as far as YouTube photographers are concerned, yeah, I can't really point to too many. There's a few images that Nigel Danson has that I really appreciate. And of course, Ben Horn, just the sheer effort of what he's done in order to produce his work is inspiring, right, in and of itself. So there it is. All right, on to beginner mistake number 3. Okay, shooting JPEG only. I highly recommend shooting JPEG plus RAW. I still do it to this day, okay? So set your camera to shoot JPEG plus RAW. Even if you're not using the RAWs, you'll thank me 6 months from now or 2 or 3 months from now when you say, oh, I wish I had the RAWs for all these photographs I've been out taking. That's a real beginner thing. Obviously, I learned on film, and I started out shooting film landscapes on film. But when I first got my first digital camera, I shot JPEGs, and I didn't shoot the RAW. And then I started shooting RAW, and everything improved, and I learned how to use the RAW. But right from the beginning, even if you don't think you're going to use them, shoot the RAWs. Back in the day, when the digital SLRs first came along, storage was expensive. And now memory cards and all that are really inexpensive. So it really behooves you to shoot RAW plus JPEG. Okay, I think we're up to number 4, and that would be try to have a clear subject, right? Try to zone in, I mean, if you have to use a telephoto lens, isolate your subject. In the beginning, there's many photographs when you start out that are just like point and shoot snapshots that include all kinds of stuff that aren't important to tell your story. Try to isolate your subject, try to have in mind what your subject is. Like, well, you know, the typical example of that and the joke is, you know, there's a little tiny squirrel in a big field and it's a portrait of a squirrel. Yeah, well, you know, just extrapolate that to anything else and you get the point, right? When somebody looks at the photograph, they're looking for what are you trying to say? What is the photograph about? What is the subject? And you should ask yourself that question. And here's a few examples of that. Mistake number 5 would be ignoring your exposure meter. On your camera, you're going to have a scale, be on the left side, right side, bottom, depending, and it'll have a 0 and a -1, -2, -3, +1, +2, +3, and there'll be a little arrow that moves back and forth. And as that arrow moves, you'll see your histogram, and I know histograms are scary, but what we're looking for is a bell-shaped histogram, right? We don't want a skew on one side or a skew on the other side, right? Where it goes up, because that means you're blowing out your highlights or your shadows have no detail. So that's what the histogram does. It tells you shadows, how much light is falling in the shadows or the highlights or up the middle, okay? And an evenly distributed histogram is kind of what you're looking for, but don't become a slave to that, right? So if your image is looking good on the back of the screen and your histogram's a little wonky, that's okay. You definitely don't want to blow out your highlights, but if your shadows go a little dark, that's somewhat a little bit more acceptable. Okay, but what you're looking for is to get and experiment with this. You know, move your shutter speed or your aperture so that your exposure. Put your camera in manual mode, obviously, and move it so that your exposure goes -1, -2, and watch what the histogram does. Watch how it moves back and forth, and then look at the back of the screen and see how it affects your photograph. Okay, see, it sounds like a simple thing, but it's well worth doing, and it's an exercise. It's well worth. The more you do it, the more it'll become common nature for you and second nature for yourself. And the easier it'll be when you're out in the field and you're trying to photograph. You know, and you don't have to worry, you're not spending money on film, right? Every time you click the button on a digital camera, it doesn't cost you anything, except for a little bit of storage, which you can erase. So don't be afraid of your camera. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to move things around. So use your exposure meter to your advantage. Shutter speeds, apertures, ISO all affect the exposure meter. And the more you get used to it, you can sit in your room and point it up at a bright white wall with a light on it, and then point it into the shadows and see what happens. See how your exposure changes. See how the photograph changes. Don't be afraid of it. That would be the mistake, right? So I think that's number 5. And my bonus tip would be avoid harsh light if you can. Try to plan your photo expeditions so that they're in the morning or the evening. Not that you want to photograph the sunset, but because when the sun's directly overhead and things are harsh, it's difficult. The contrast range it's hard light, and it's difficult to make soft, pleasing, tranquil landscape images, right? And so avoid the harsh light. Now, if the only time that you can go out is during the harsh light, well then make the best of it. I would recommend try to shoot in black and white. Definitely watch your highlights. Try to shoot in the shadows if you can, that kind of a thing. You can make good photographs in harsh light. It's just more difficult, all right? We're not going out to photograph the sunrises and the sunsets. What we're doing is we're going out to photograph the things that are illuminated by the softer light that happens during sunrise and sunset. Now you can photograph the sunrises or the sunsets. I wouldn't stop you. And if I saw something really cool and I could make a really cool image with a sunrise or a sunset, that would be awesome and I would do it. but it's not, so that's not why I'm going out there during those times. A great example of a place where you can shoot all day long, and it's why it's a photographic paradise in a way, is Zion National Park. And the reason why it's got these really, really big canyons of red sandstone. And so in bright sunlight, the light reflects off the canyon walls and reflects down onto subjects in the canyons. And the subjects in the canyons are lit with this beautiful red light, which that's, you know, you're not photographing the red light on the canyon walls, you're photographing the reflection of that light off of subjects. And that's why you can shoot there all day long. It acts like a big, bright red reflector, which creates the most beautiful, magical light down in the canyons. So if you're wondering why photographers love going to Zion, that's why. So, but that's an example. You have to think like that, right? What's the light doing? It's a game of billiards in a way. What's the light doing? How can I get the light to be pleasing for my photograph? Like right now, the sun went behind a cloud and this video looks great. When the sun comes out from behind the cloud and it's harsh, it doesn't look as good, but I've been really working hard when I've been making this video to try to angle the light and the shadows and stay in the shade of the trees, etc., to try to keep the light from being too harsh. So that's my bonus tip as a mistake to avoid, which would be, oh, you know, if you can choose your times, try to avoid direct, harsh noonday sun, okay? All right. Well, that wraps it up for me in this video. I really appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully it was helpful to somebody, and thank you for watching so much. If you enjoyed it, please, small channels need all the help they can get, and the number one thing you can do to help me out is hit that subscribe button and give the video a like, because that makes the algorithm get excited and it shows it to other people, and then the channel grows and I get to keep doing this, and it's my passion and I really enjoy doing it. So thanks again so much, and we'll see you out here. Have a great one. Bye.